In the blood-splattered streets of radical Paris, where the guillotine had become a weapon of terror instead of justice, there is one killing that is remembered, not for how it was carried out, but for its ghastly, almost unimaginable cruelty. During an era steeped in blood and vengeance, the assassination of Princess Marie-Thérèse Louise de Savoy-Carignan, better known as the Princess de Lamballe, was so brutal that even the most cynical revolutionaries were taken aback. This was greater than an execution. This was an act of brutality, shock message sent straight to the heart of the monarchy. On September 3rd, 1792, the sweet and devoted Princess de Lamballe met her fate so cruel that it has echoed through history as one of the most brutal acts of mob cruelty in the French Revolution. But who was this woman, and why did she die so horribly? The Princess de Lamballe was no typical aristocrat. She was Queen Marie Antoinette's dear friend and closest confidant. Her loyalty was unbreakable, a devotion so complete that it would eventually cost her everything. Born to wealth but tempered by personal tragedy, she devoted her life to the French monarchy. Her story is not just one of royalty, but of genuine friendship, tremendous sacrifice, and unshakable loyalty. Loyalty so strong it prompted her to take the ultimate choice, death, rather than betrayal. To appreciate the full extent of this tragedy, we have to go back to 1792, a year in which France plunged into revolutionary chaos, and mobs ran through the streets with an insatiable hunger for noble blood. What happened to Princess de Lamballe is more than a political aside. It is a cold reminder of the rapidity with which civilization can degenerate into madness. Her ultimate fate is the demonstration of the lowest aspects of human nature, showing how fear, hatred, and mob mentality can turn human beings into something other than their own. And what you're about to discover may change everything you'd ever thought you knew about the French Revolution. The atrocities that were committed against her weren't random or coincidental. She was targeted. Her assassination was framed as psychological terror, not just meant to kill a royal supporter, but to shatter the mind of Queen Marie Antoinette. The revolutionaries knew that by torturing and humiliating the Queen's dearest friend, they could cut deeper than any sword. Therefore, who was this woman before the storm? Marie-Thérèse Louise of Savoy-Carignan was born on the 8th of September, 1749, in one of Europe's most celebrated royal houses. Her childhood, while shrouded in wealth and luxury, was overshadowed with deep grief, losses that would mold her into a tragic and pitiful character. She was wed, aged 17, to Louis-Alexandre de Bourbon, Prince of Lamballe, a nephew of King Louis XV and an heir to immense fortunes. But the union was far from a fairy tale. The prince, who was famous for his hedonistic life, gambling, and womanizing, was ill-fitted to the sensitive and religious Marie. Tragedy befell them only a year after they were wedded. In May 1768, he died, presumably from a disease contracted during his assignations, leaving the young princess a young widow at the age of 18. Rather than stepping back from court society or marrying again as so many had predicted, the bereaved Princess de Lamballe gave meaning to another course of action, one of service and empathy. Her tragedy had untoughened her heart and opened her eyes, and not long after, her generosity would lead her into the world of another young woman struggling with her own duels in the gilded cages of royalty, Marie Antoinette, Austria-born Dauphine of France. Their friendship was immediate and genuine. Both women were aliens. Marie Antoinette, a homesick and excluded figure within French tradition, and the princess, a widow and seeker of purpose. They discovered reassurance, empathy, and a suggested sense of belonging in each other that would intensify with the years. To the queen, the princess was a friend as well as a lifeline in the stormy sea of palace politics. When Marie Antoinette became queen in 1774, she repaid that devotion with a new position just for her dear friend, superintendent of the queen's household. It was a position of great prestige, authority, and wealth, 150,000 livres a year. But danger accompanied power. As the queen's closest friend, the Princess de Lamballe became a target of abuse. The excesses of the royal court were already being deplored, and the people's resentment quickly extended to the queen's entourage. Aggressive pamphlets emerged, portraying the princess as an alien agent and corrupting influence on the queen's debaucheries. Despite the surge of hatred and peril encircling her, the princess never budged from her post. She realized that her devotion put her in peril, but also realized that the queen needed her more than ever. She had seen Marie Antoinette's sufferings firsthand, her difficulties as a mother, her distant and chilly husband, and the incessant witch-hunting by the common people as well as the nobility. For Princess de Lamballe, it was something more than friendship. She was a monarchist. She considered herself a guardian not just of the queen's heart, but of the monarchical soul itself. She was duty-bound even as revolution storm clouds gathered. Throughout the 1780s, France was disintegrating around a deteriorating financial crisis. Political discourse became venomous, and cries for change more raucous and violent. The princess stood somberly, watching opinion turn away from anger to outrage on the streets. And yet, she stayed loyal to Marie Antoinette, a bastion of commitment as the world around them burned. And as you'll soon see, that loyalty would be repaid with betrayal, horror, and a death that would mark a dark chapter in the history of revolution. The bond between Princess de Lamballe and Queen Marie Antoinette had grown far beyond friendship. It had become a sisterhood forged through shared trials, secrets, and sorrows. The princess stood by the queen's side during some of her most intimate moments, including the births of her children. She was more than a trusted friend. She was a stand-in mother, an emotional anchor, a figure of unwavering allegiance. But it was that same profound loyalty which would ultimately seal her fate in tragedy. To the revolutionaries, her connection with the Queen made her just as guilty, an accomplice to the atrocities they believed the monarchy had perpetrated against the people. When the French Revolution broke out in 1789, it was like a pressure cooker that had finally burst after years of mounting pressure. Decades of economic ruin, class inequity, and political disintegration had created a maelstrom of resentment that was ready to reduce not just the monarchy, but the entire aristocracy. For the Princess de Lamballe, who had spent her life within the elegant confines of Versailles, this revolution was political revolution gone too far. It was an openly vociferous challenge to everything she cherished. At first, everybody thought that there could be a peaceful revolution to introduce reform. The princess, too, like everybody else in the royal family, thought that there was hope of saving the monarchy with compromise. They hoped reason would win. But they were wrong. Things soon got completely out of control. By 1791, they were decisively on the losing side. The failed royal flight to Varennes destroyed public trust in the monarchy, and anti-royalist feeling against the royal family erupted. Princess de Lamballe, so closely identified with the Queen, was herself in an increasingly perilous position. Friends urged her to depart, to escape to the courts of Europe where title and birth would be her shield. Time still remained to escape. Time still remained to save herself. But the princess was forced to make a choice of heartbreak. She could leave France, save her own life, and abandon the Queen or stay on, very well knowing that honor might take her to the scaffold. For a woman whose life had been built of service, of love, of honor, there was never truly any choice. She stayed. Her decision wasn't rash or illiterate. She knew exactly what she risked. She had seen what revolutionary mobs were capable of. She had read the posters that labeled her an enemy of the people. She knew that several of her noble friends already lay dead, victims of brutality. But still, her dedication never faltered. She had promised allegiance to her queen and could not, in her heart, believe that it would be any betrayal of what she cherished to refuse Marie Antoinette in her hour of maximum need. And it wasn't just loyalty that restrained her, it was faith. The princess had a firm conviction that pain was transitory, but honor and religious duty were eternal. If death awaited her, then so be it. She would die with dignity, for she knew that she died of love, of loyalty, and of truth. When 1792 began, it was clear that France had entered a new and terrifying age. The royal family had been removed from Versailles to the Tuileries Palace and lived there as virtual prisoners under close guard. Tensions grew more strained by the day. When France declared war against Austria and Prussia, that April, revolutionary paranoia erupted. Anyone connected with the monarchy, and especially those with foreign connections, became an instant suspect. The princess, born in Italy and loyal to the Queen of Austria, now represented all that the revolution hated. Accusations were whispered. She was accused by some of being a spy, by others of being an insidious influence on the Queen. All of it nothing more than fire for the growing cry for vengeance. And by the summer of 1792, her fate was sealed. The radical Jacobins had taken over the government of the Revolution. Their shout was deafening, violent, and categorical. Mercy had been expunged from the vocabulary only revolutionary justice, which equaled the extermination of any alleged enemy, regardless of innocence. Then came August, and with it, coup de grâce. The Tuileries Palace was taken by storm by revolutionary forces. The Swiss guards were brutally killed in a massacre. The Queen and King were arrested and held captive in the Temple Tower, and all those connected with them were hunted down. But in spite of her noble blood and foreign connections, Princess de Lamballe did not leave. She could have summoned foreign protection. She could have claimed immunity, but she didn't. Once again, she stood by her friends. On August 19th, 1792, she was arrested and pulled into La Force Prison, one of the filthiest, most feared prisons in Paris. It was an institution designed to shatter the human spirit, a far cry from Versailles' beauty. She endured unthinkable conditions there, filthy cells, unclean lodgings, starvation, and endless bullying by officials and other prisoners. But in spite of this, the princess never lost her composure. She would not impeach the monarchy, even when it might have meant life and death. She would not betray her queen. Revolutionary officials had hoped to turn her into a witness, someone who would turn against Marie Antoinette and provide the kind of testimony that would forever demolish the monarchy. But she would not. She was remarkably strong. In filth and fear, she prayed. She donated what little she owned. Her captors would recall her serenity, her compassion, and the implicit strength that defied the individuals around her. The guards grew enraged. Their methods could not penetrate her. Her dignity and silence made her useless to them. Past a traitor, she was an unshatterable symbol of devotion. And in a time when loyalty was treason, her fate could no longer be a matter of if, but when. Rather than crushing her spirit, the Princess de Lamballe's refusal to betray her principles made her into a symbol, one the revolutionaries were hell-bent on destroying. She represented everything they despised: nobles' privilege, foreign interference, and unwavering allegiance to the monarchy. Her passive resistance had to be shattered in order to show that the revolutionary cause could not be defeated. As the weeks passed under the gloomy walls of La Force prison, the princess would have sensed that her time had come. Paris was electric with tension to the maximum. Though she could not swear in what precise manner the violence would erupt, she well knew that time ran out for her. The tolerance of the revolutionaries was exhausted, and her refusal to relinquish the throne had placed a bull's-eye on her back. Yet she remained steadfast, honor over life, and loyalty over fear. Then the September massacres of 1792, perhaps the most red and black moment in all French revolutionary history. Over the course of this horrific week, all sense of civic justice was forsaken as revolutionary leaders turned ordinary citizens into murderers. No marauding randomness this, but a deliberate purge to eliminate foes of the new regime and fill with fear anyone who might resist. It began on September 2nd. Amidst reports of foreign soldiers encircling Paris and reports of captured clergy and nobles plotting to break free and use the revolution against itself, radical politicians like Jean-Paul Marat and Georges Danton goaded the populace into a frenzy. In their speeches, they demanded that only brutal, harsh action could save France. And so, the gates of Parisian prisons were flung open, not to freedom, but to slaughter. Mobs roamed the city for 5 days, shooting more than 1,000 prisoners in cold blood. The worst part? The killers weren't seasoned criminals or soldiers, but everyday Parisians, shopkeepers, blacksmiths, bakers, who had been convinced that murder was an act of patriotism. This disgusting banality of evil, neighbor against neighbor, was one of the most unsettling aspects of the massacres. On the 3rd of September, the fury switched to La Force prison. They had heard that the Queen's dearest friend was being held there, and they were willing to send a message, not just to her, but to Marie Antoinette herself. The Princess de Lamballe embodied everything that they were determined to destroy: loyalty, nobility, and the old regime. Dragged from her cell, the princess was brought before an ad hoc tribunal in the prison courtyard. It was no trial, though, drama. The sentence had been decided months before, when she stood confronting the crowd. The putative judges, drunk on power and savagery, demanded that she abdicate the throne, pledge allegiance to the Republic, and damn Marie Antoinette as a treasoness. What they essentially desired was not so much what she would say, it was her shame. With silent courage, the princess declined. She explained quietly to them that she could not and would not betray her queen or go against her principles. She did not trust the new regime, and she would not swear false oaths to save her life. Her quietness surprised even her accusers. But instead of submission, where they had hoped, they were offered dignity, and that obstinacy enraged them. There arose a shout from the crowd, "Death to Antoinette's friend!" The instant was made ferocious in a moment. The princess was ripped from the courtyard and thrust onto the street, where she was forced to endure a gauntlet of accommodated assailants. Wielding clubs, knives, and fists, the crowd attacked her brutally. From witness accounts, she was raped and stripped before her life was finally taken. Her murder was slow, gruesome, and sadistic. The violence was not an afterthought. It was a goal. They wanted to intimidate her. They wanted to destroy her. But that still wasn't enough. What followed is one of the most gruesome cases of mob violence that has ever been recorded. They murdered her, then beheaded her. But this was not an ordinary beheading. Her lifeless corpse was desecrated, sliced up, paraded around, and used not as a human body, but as a political symbol to destroy and desecrate. The crowd spiked her head on a pike and began a ghastly procession through the streets of Paris, chanting and screaming revolutionaries. Her bloody face was waved around like a trophy, a twisted celebration of the triumph of revolution over despotism. But that was not all. They further disfigured her body by cutting it into pieces, distributing some of which among the bystanders as ghastly souvenirs. The execution of the princess was not only an act of execution, it was a terror spectacle, a message sent with maximum cruelty. It was to shatter the psyche of the royal family and Queen Marie Antoinette in particular. It was to show that anyone holding on to monarchical loyalty would not merely be killed, but dehumanized, desecrated, and destroyed. In the end, the murder of Princess de Lamballe uncovered the most unattractive feature of the revolution, not just its violence, but its humanity. Her unwavering devotion and integrity in the face of such savagery had a legacy far more powerful than the fury of the mob. She perished a martyr to loyalty, a sorry reminder of just how far human beings will walk away from honor and decency when fear, anger, and power overrule compassion and reason. And when her severed head was marched on parade through Parisian streets, the revolution had made its point amply clear. In this regime, not even the dead would be safe. Some accounts have it that members of the mob carried things to the extreme of removing the princess's heart and eating it. A bloody scene which perhaps more properly belongs to legend than fact. But what there can be no denying is that her corpse was treated in ghastly brutality, even by revolution standards. Those who witnessed the brutality being unleashed were shaken to their cores, even after they had already been subjected to horrors across Paris. This was different. It was personal, intentional, and completely fiendish. Following her heinous slaughter, the crowd seized the severed head of the princess and commenced a grotesque procession through the city. Their target, the Temple Tower, where Marie Antoinette was confined. But this was no impromptu outburst of griefless revelry. This was a deliberate construction psychological attack. The revolutionaries would not rest with simply assassinating the Queen's dearest friend. They sought to break her emotionally, to destroy her spirit beyond recovery, so that the Queen might be able to identify her friend. The mob cleaned and styled the princess's hair. They even applied makeup to her deformed face, macabrely caricaturing the beauty she had once been renowned for. The head was turned into a travesty of what it had been, a grisly insult meant to evoke horror and despair. When the mob reached the Temple Tower, They demanded that the guards force Marie Antoinette to look down at the carnage. The queen declined, but the mob's threats grew so vicious that she was eventually shoved to the window. She fainted at the sight, say eyewitnesses. That was a devastating psychological blow. Marie Antoinette had lost her throne, her freedom, and her dignity. But to see the defiled body of her dearest friend destroyed whatever hopes she may still have had. The message was brutally clear. The revolution could reach anyone, even in death, and above all to those who were dearest to the Queen. The violence did not stop at the murder. The festivities of the mob continued for hours afterward. They gathered in taverns, toasted their victory, and paraded the princess's head from square to square. Different groups claimed it like a trophy. Even in France, the September massacres and the fate of the Princess de Lamballe caused outrage. Moderate revolutionaries were horrified. Her murder was a watershed, proof that the revolution had descended into arbitrary violence in which anyone could be next. It set off a round of internal purges, with groups competing with one another to show their revolutionary zeal by committing yet more appalling acts of violence. Ironically, this bloodlust began to destroy the revolution from the inside. As it frightened its enemies and consolidated radical power, the revolution also alienated possible friends, both internal and external. The murder of Princess de Lamballe became a spectral example of how a revolution born of ideals of justice and liberty had sunk to monstrosity. Her murder, as gruesome as it was, became both a banner of revolutionary might and a foretelling of its eventual descent into tyranny. Back in the Temple Tower, meanwhile, the royal family was devastated. Marie Antoinette's physical and mental health never recovered from that day. She was never the same. King Louis XVI was also upset by the killing of a man he had known and respected for so many years. Their children, especially the young Dauphin, were upset by their parents' open grief and the terrifying realization that even those most loved among them could be torn apart by hate. The revolutionary leadership did not conceal public atrocity. They celebrated it. Radical leaders like Jean-Paul Marat defended the killing, painting the act as justice served. Defense of monarchy was treason to them, and treason had to be punished, no matter how brutal. This unapologetic embracing of violence reflected a terrifying realignment. The revolution was no longer about liberty, equality, or fraternity. It was about survival, vengeance, and power. The death of the Princess de Lamballe was more than the unfortunate fate of an innocent woman. It was the death of the soul of the revolution. Both sides politicized her death. To the radicals, it illustrated their ruthless power, proof that no one was beyond their grasp. To the counter-revolutionaries, it was a rallying cry, a grim reminder of everything the revolution had lost and everything it had become. Her mutilated body became legendary, and her name etched itself into history as a deplorable martyr. The diplomatic fallout was prompt and severe. Governments across Europe now believed that negotiating with revolutionary France was impossible. The death of the princess and of hundreds of others in the massacres had made it clear that the revolution no longer respected life, law, or humanity. War was inevitable. And lastly, the murder of Princess de Lamballe left an unforgettable impression on the history of women in revolution. Her death was a reminder that women who waded into political circles, especially those near power, were not just vulnerable to judgment, but to annihilation. Her loyalty, Her courage and her fate showed the steep cost of standing one's ground in a time when the world was determined to destroy everything. Her killing exposed the brutal irony at the heart of the revolution, that the lofty ideals of liberty and equality did not extend to immunity from violence, and least of all to women who were identified with the ancien regime. The message was clear. Aristocratic women, no matter how apolitical or well-intentioned, could expect no mercy. This grisly realization led several noble women to leave France lest they meet the same end as the Princess de Lamballe. The nature of her execution also set a perilous precedent. Psychological torture became a deliberate policy of the revolutionary government. The individual's death was not always enough. They began using the suffering and death of loved ones to break the will of political adversaries. The princess's fate served as an example for state terror, with public violence turned into a grisly spectacle designed to terrify. The financial consequences were no less severe. The September massacres, the death of the princess among them, sent shock waves through foreign markets. Investors withdrew, trade slowed, and France grew increasingly isolated. Her death, now one of the most notorious incidents of the Revolution, helped consolidate the image of revolutionary France as a nation left to barbarism, damaging its already fragile economy. But the legacy of the Princess de Lamballe reaches much further than political or economic ramifications. Culturally, her destiny grew to represent something much deeper: loyalty, sacrifice, and the horrific human cost of political fanaticism. Writers, artists, and dramatists across centuries, from Edmund Burke to Stefan Zweig, have employed her story to analyze how civilization collapses into chaos and how noble qualities are transformed into liabilities amidst times of turmoil.